Hello dear folks, welcome to another issue. Today we are again dedicated to a pop culture topic. However, it is also dark stuff at the same time, and sometimes these things go hand in hand. This is a current scandal. You have probably all heard. It's about the story of Gene Combs, or better known under his stage name P.Diddy. Although he had several names, and in the last few days it went through the media. This is a huge scandal about Father Diddy. He's involved into a bunch of criminal things, abuse of power. A whole story like you feel you've heard it before, but that is what we want to focus on today. And I will look at what exactly the factual background is, what the charges are, but then we will also go a little deeper and try to understand a little bit of this system in which any milieu can also think. And we'll try to classify the whole thing like that, and at the very beginning I have prepared a video for you. Because we'll take a look at what the public prosecutor's office has to say about it. This is very interesting. This whole P.Diddy story, there have been rumors and allegations there for decades. But it was never justiciable in any way. Even though the man had been in court a few times, you could never really prove anything to him. He's always somehow got out with good lawyers. He's been around for decades, involved in some things, and there were unbelievably many rumors. But now actually this year the whole thing has picked up quite a bit. And that actually started with the Cassie Ventura case. This was his longtime girlfriend, wife, girlfriend, partner. I don't know if you can say about partner. I'm having such a hard time with words because the guy is such a misogynist and this is such a toxic relationship that I don't even know if you can call it a partnership. But so you understand, they were together for a while, and this Cassie. I still have Cassie now because that's also an artist's name. She's also a musician herself. I have it. I think it was last year. She made this case public and reported it, and because she was the closest to it, she had many opportunities to build up pressure, and then we did it again. I think it was settled out of court. There was a lot of money flowing from P.Diddy to her. But after this coming out, I'll call it from Cassie afterwards. Why a hell broke loose, and after that a lot of people came forward. Women as well as men, musicians, people from the industry who had the allegations against P.Diddy, and some were really serious, and that kind of got the thing rolling. And there have already been headlines on the topic several times this year. Earlier in the year, sometime in the spring, his buildings, at least 3 properties, were advised by the police. Although, it's not police at all, it's federal police, federal authorities. That's, I think, another very important point. And they stormed his real estate, his properties, and investigated, and there were an incredible number of them there. Potentially possible evidence secured, and that was a few months ago, and now in September. Has the case become really big? Father Diddy was arrested. He is also in prison now, and I guess he won't get out that soon, and then there was the prosecutor who is behind this whole case. He gave a press conference, and we'll look at it now, and I just want to say something about it. I'm not an expert in the justice system, but there are of course different authorities there. The USA is also a little different than here. There are authorities of the individual federal states. That's where it actually starts, says sheriff, and then also the judiciary. But there are also federal authorities, federal agencies. And here there is one, the Federal Public Prosecutor's Office. That is very important, which applies, so to speak, to the entire United States. Of course, they don't have all legal topics as a basis. So if it's about having no idea about civil law or something like that, then they're not popular. But with bigger things, and I think, as I said, I'm not exactly sure where the border is from when the federal authorities intervene there. But I guess it's also about allegations of criminal organizations and so on. In any case, what we're seeing right now is the press conference by a federal prosecutor. That's, I think, decisively from the District of New York South, and let's listen to this press conference. Let's hear from the district attorney.
Everyone, my name is Damian Williams, and I'm the U.S. Attorney here in the Southern District of New York. Today I'm announcing the unsealing of a 3-count indictment, charging Sean Combs with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, interstate transportation for prostitution. The indictment alleges that between at least 2008 and the present.
Very short pause. I always intervene like that. So he himself says he is the federal at Tournament Federal Prosecutor's Office, and he is the press conference where it is about the indictment and this indictment. He now presents what all the points are in it are, and in the introductory words he has already said that it is about larger allegations and that it all takes place over a period of time from 2008 to today. There may have been stories before. So, you might have to say, one of the reasons why this is starting now, I've already said it, is because this Cassie Ventura had her coming out. But it's also because in the state of New York. In any case, it's also in the state of New York. The statute of limitations for such accusations when it comes to sexual assault. All these things, this statute of limitations, that was previously always at 3 years. If someone after 3 years, then the allegations come out, it is statute barred. But New York has changed these statute of limitations to over 20 years. So that things that were already a few years ago are now on the board. Let's listen to what he lists here. What there are accusations in it. And that's really a whole latte.
Combs abused, threatened, and coerced victims to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. As alleged in the indictment, to carry out this conduct, Sean Combs led and participated in a racketeering conspiracy that used the business empire he controlled to carry out criminal activity.
Okay, so it's said here, it's about many, many fields. What did he say about everything? Sexual trafficking. That the people. Trade may be the wrong word, but sex workers cross state lines. I don't know exactly what the legal details are. But it's just an incredibly big bar. Is a fact, and that's how it is said. He had a company. By the way, the company is really big. As a businessman the man is great. He has built up some rumors up to $1 billion. But that's quite a path like that a man, and the accusation is that he has his entire company. This entire company empire in show business, which he founded, also serves to be able to carry out all these acts. Also to disguise them so that they don't get out. And these are legal things where you are really vulnerable if, so to speak, your company is used for criminal activities. Yes, to conceal or to enable in the first place. That's something that is also included in the allegations here. That's also what means a consequence that your property is no longer there in the long run. Because it is said that this is being used for criminal purposes. That's like if you commit any crime with your car. Then your car can also be taken away, even though you might otherwise drive the car. But it says it's used for a crime. That adds up really high here. So it's really about his entire company network, and it's also about his employees who were involved. But he says it all in detail.
Including sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and the obstruction of justice. Let me say a little bit more about the charges. The indictment alleges that Combs abused and exploited women and other people for years, and in a variety of ways. As alleged, Combs used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sexual performances with male commercial sex workers.
Okay, what he's saying here. He's had women and men involved for years. People who work in show business. Sometimes even well-known artists, involved there. He forced them to certain sexual practices, for which he then in turn hired professionals, i.e., professional sex workers, prostitutes, men like women and more involved. And he forced, partly with threats, with coercion, ultimately exploited his power. Young artists who projected their hope for a career on him. Who was above all also a producer in hip-hop, I mean. The guy is a musician, who is a producer, who is just the boss. And if you want to make a career, He can promote your career. He can't make you a superstar, and he has made several people superstars. But of course he can also completely prevent your career, and that's simply exploiting the power he did there. And like I said, men and women. And they were then partly forced into sexual practices that they did not want, and how they are forced, partly by threats of arms, by coercion, by blackmail. Opposite the whole thing. Over decades, you have to say. And there are so many cases because of this. There are so many examples of this. It's not just a party that's been going on. We're talking about decades.
Whom he transported or caused to be transported over state lines. Combs allegedly planned and controlled the sex performances, which he called freak-offs, and he often electronically recorded them. The freak-offs sometimes lasted days at a time, involved multiple commercial sex workers, and often involved a variety of narcotics, such as ketamine, ecstasy, and GHB.
So he says that's also a point. He says he has these parties, they were called freak out. Which annoys me a bit that the guy calls them freak out, because that's freak out. So it gets an extremely negative connotation. Although that's actually something like that could also be said like freaking out or something like that. But what's more called freak out? These are dark parties, and he says that these parties have been held in different places for decades, which sometimes went on for days. That people were forced there into sexual practices against their will. That structures were also made with all kinds of drugs and substances of various kinds. That's what he said here.
Combs distributed to the victims to keep them obedient and compliant. As alleged, when Combs didn't get his way, he was violent, and he subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse so that they would participate in the freak-offs.
So he says if the victims, if they didn't want to do that, then he became violent. In several cases this is demonstrably violent. Has forced people to do it, violent on different levels. Physical violence, emotional violence, psychological violence, the type of manipulator, and ultimately also simpler. Those who really didn't want to participate became like that with drugs. Put in a state that he is willless and simply cannot defend them. And at the same time all these things were always filmed and documented, and that in turn is material with which he then had the people under control for years or decades. He then really has it in his hand and can thus in turn build up pressure so that they at least shut up and don't say anything about it. That's how he abused his power.
And that Combs hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged victims, at times by their hair. On one occasion in March of 2016.
So he says there are also instances where he really used physical force. And now he mentions here an example of what is actually public. And I also saw the video, but I don't want to show it here. But you can look for it if you want. There is a video, which I think also appeared this year or last year. A video of what a security camera was made in a hotel, and you can see a hotel in the hotel corridor, and his girlfriend of many years, Cassie, she wants to get out of the hotel room. He's in the shower right now and she wants to run away somehow because who knows what happened there again. And then you see him coming out of the shower. He just has a towel around and running down the hotel hallway, and he beats up this woman. The woman then lies on the ground and he steps on her with his feet. He just pulls her by the hair, the curse down the corridor, fear. Bare pictures also. Degrading. So, and that's what he's just saying here. It really became clear. I mean, that's hard evidence then. There have been rumors like that before. But here you can watch it on a video, and I mean that's blatant behavior. No.
Conduct was captured on video and later reported in the media. Specifically, Combs kicked, dragged, and threw a vase at a victim in a Los Angeles hotel when the victim was attempting to flee. As alleged, these assaults often resulted in injuries to the victims, which took days or weeks to heal. In addition to the violence, The indictment alleges that Combs threatened and coerced victims to get them to participate in the freak-offs. He used the embarrassing and sensitive recordings he made of the freak-offs as collateral against the victims.
Damn, that again. Everything was recorded and he just forced people to continue participating there. Once you were in there, by having compromising material from you on videos, he has forced people to continue there. You couldn't really escape the system once you were in there. It just used and exploited too much power.
The indictment alleges that he maintained control over the victims in several ways, including by giving them drugs, by giving and threatening to take away financial support or housing, by promising them career opportunities, by monitoring their whereabouts, and even by dictating their physical appearance.
He completely manipulated people. Anyone who wanted to get out there was threatened, either withdraw financial support. If you're already Star Wars, there you take things away. Right? By all means, pressure was built up there. It was said what the people had to do. What kind of sexual practices. That goes down to the outfits. What they then have to wear, and by all means people were kept in there. With drugs, with violence, with blackmail, coercion. Whatever it is that you want to clarify in detail legally.
Because of all of this, the indictment alleges that the victims did not believe they could refuse Combs without risking their security or facing more abuse. The indictment also alleges other acts of violence undertaken by Combs and others, including violence against witnesses to his abuse, kidnapping,
Here
and
he
arson.
also says that there was violence and threat of violence against everyone who somehow witnessed it. Who somehow saw it. And that goes all the way to arson and. There are a number of serious allegations here.
The indictment alleges that on more than one occasion, Combs carried or brandished firearms to intimidate and threaten victims and witnesses.
Here is also the fact that weapons were also used. And yes, man, he also had a lot of weapons at these councils. Found, but she showed it right away.
Now, Combs did not do this all on his own. As I mentioned, Combs has been charged with RICO conspiracy.
This is also interesting. He says here that the Combs, i.e., Father Diddy, didn't do all this alone. But here too there is an accusation of a RICO conspiracy. RICO. That's how it is. A law, the RICO law, that is, I think I wrote it down once. Recording influenced and corrupt organizations' record. That's something like blackmail. The fact that he founded a criminal association that made this possible in the first place. There was no lone perpetrator, but he built a system and through his power had a whole lot of accomplices. One could probably say that they made it possible for him to commit all these crimes.
He used his business and employees of that business and other close associates to get his way. Those individuals allegedly included high-ranking supervisors in the business, personal assistants, security staff, and household staff.
So here he says that people who worked in his company, especially those who then became influential, supervisors. Those are the top positions in such a company. They took part, but of course also security people. His bodyguards, they also took care of this. He had a bunch of people who sort of made sure that these parties could take place in the first place and then talks a little bit more about it.
The indictment alleges that those individuals facilitated the freak-offs. They booked the hotel rooms and stocked them with the supplies.
So these parties, they were properly prepared for him. They did, also because this goes on for decades. Not only took place in his property. He had several beautiful properties. But also in hotel rooms and so on, and his people. He had his inner circle there. They already prepared this party. You couldn't just do it like that. Sex workers, prostitutes from all possible parts of the country were flown in. There was an incredible amount of cash that was brought there. with which you then make all sorts of bribes, hush money, to people. The guy simply said he can buy people, and that's what this worldview has. Everyone is for sale and he has the money, and then no matter, you can do what you want, and if someone doesn't like it, then you just pay them for it. That's the idea behind it, and his crew who prepared these parties. That's where some really ugly details come to light. So they brought it to light there. Ensured that there were enough threats, they had. But I think I grabbed it in front of me.
Baby oil, personal lubricant, extra linens, and lighting.
Exactly, so they prepared these parties. These freak-off parties, so to speak, by bringing money. Enough drugs, hotels prepared, and that goes into the details that have plenty of baby oil and lubricants there. The talk is that 1,000 bottles of baby oil were found in one of his present. I have to imagine what dimensions that goes. It's downright grotesque. 1,000 bottles and lubricants, drugs, money, even when these parties were in hotels. They even brought fresh sheets because these hotel rooms after these parties. I mean, don't you want to start a head cinema there? But like that, you couldn't show a hotel room like that and just hand it over to the cleaning lady. But he had his people who then simply removed the worst traces and then even put fresh bed linen on it. I have to imagine what dimension that is.
When the hotel rooms got damaged, they helped clean it up. They arranged for victims and commercial sex workers to travel for the freak-offs, and they delivered large quantities of cash to Combs to pay for the commercial sex workers. The indictment also alleges that they helped Combs cover up his crimes. During the March 2016 incident at the LA hotel that I mentioned earlier, a member of the hotel security staff intervened, and Combs attempted to bribe the staff member with a stack of cash.
This is the story where he punched and kicked his girlfriend Kathy, who is lying on the floor in the hotel. And hey, this was recorded by a hotel camera, and of course there were also security people in the hotel who saw it on a camera and tried to intervene there. The security man was, hey, this is his model, and it is just said that he has proven that he then simply tried to bribe the security man with such a bundle of banknotes. That was the method, everything with money somehow. You know when someone sees something and then has a problem. Here it's just a question of price and then you shut up, and actually that works for many people. But not for everyone.
Or that what happened was kept quiet. And as the indictment alleges, in late 2023, after public allegations were made about Combs' crimes, he and others pressured witnesses and victims to stay silent, including by making phone calls to witnesses and victims and giving them a false narrative of what they had experienced.
That is also added. So this subtle psychological manipulation, hey, if you were at such a freak out party, when I say as a victim, then in the days after, what's that doing to your head? You may not have such a clear memory in many cases because you were drugged like that. But you may also see the marks on your body. Also the wounds and injuries, and he then, with subtle psychological manipulation, gave people a narrative of what could have happened. Which sometimes people believe because they didn't have a clear memory of what actually happened. By the way, this is a topic, not just with the Combs was. Time is becoming more frequent. These knockout stories, and where people are then drugged. Then crimes are committed against them, abuse, rape, and you can't remember clearly afterwards. But you can see in your body that something happened. What a terrible situation, and he has already, so to speak, persuaded the people, including the victims, what they actually have to believe, so that most of the victims don't even know what to use to go to the authorities, to the police, if you yourself don't know exactly what happened.
And as alleged, Combs used others to help conceal his abuse by monitoring and preventing victims from leaving a location in order to hide their injuries, or by locating and contacting a victim who had attempted to flee. As part of this investigation, in March of this year, special agents from HSI executed search warrants at Combs' residences in Miami and Los Angeles.
So what I just said, got it earlier in the year. He said in March, I think, they were just present from him in Florida and search Los Angeles.
They also executed a warrant for Combs's electronic devices. During those searches, agents seized evidence of the crimes charged in this indictment. They seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 defaced AR-15s and a large-capacity drum magazine.
So there were all kinds of electronic raids. Devices, memory, data, media were confiscated there. And that's quite a lot. He also recorded everything and then bunkered everything in order to somehow use it again against you later, and what he now comes to talk about here is that it is almost self-evident that weapons were also found in these raids. Weapons and ammunition, I mean, we are the USA and the armies have a relationship with weapons. So the point is not so surprising that some super rich people also have guns in their properties. But it's just that. At least, also war weapons, so here an AR rifle. I think this is an assault rifle.
Sees evidence of the freak-offs. Electronic devices that contain images and videos of the freak-offs with multiple victims.
And there was an endless amount of evidence. Secured, yeah, well, pictures. Videos of these freakouts because he just did that, so that's now legally in there. Prosecution is pretty simple. Because the guy has, sort of, yes, built an archive of abuse. What is now in the hands of the prosecutor?
He sees cases and cases of the kinds of personal lubricant and baby oil that Combs' staff allegedly used to stock hotel rooms for the freak-offs. More than 1,000 bottles altogether.
I would have said now, I had mentioned it before. Math, boxes of lube, and baby oil found there. Boxes, and that has added up, now just in his estate, to over 1,000 bottles, so large bottles. Baby oil and lubricant, I mean, that's the amount alone. It really sends a cold shiver down your spine, doesn't it? The size of those parties.
Here are some of the items that we recovered during the searches. It contains, I believe, 50.
Just because it's in America. Isn't that so now? Super surprising that of course, such people can also find weapons. Have this AK
but it
here.
Is.
Riff if these are military weapons. And here he also shows that the serial number. Out 2. Removed. And, what makes this all the more important legally? More serious.
I mentioned as well, we recovered 3 AR-15s. This is a close-up shot of one of the AR-15s, and you can see right here, the serial number has been thoroughly defaced. Another picture of more ammunition and parts of 2 AR-15s right there. Now, I want to be clear about 2 things.
Now comes a really exciting part. That's one of the reasons I wanted the video. On the one hand, of course, because he helps us, so to speak, to get through all these charges. There are so many things like that, and he tells them all. But what he says now is so slow it's coming to the end of this press conference. I find it really exciting, that's why you listen.
First, this office is determined to investigate and prosecute anyone who engages in sex trafficking, no matter how powerful or wealthy or famous you may be.
Here he says he is. Office, and this is very important, as I said. This is not just any authority. This is the federal prosecutor's office and his office. So really also physically, his people. His department makes this promise here that they will prosecute any kind of crime of this kind. i.e. human trafficking and sex trafficking. Regardless of whether the suspect, the accused, how rich it is, how famous he is. And that, I think, is a very interesting one. Yes, we have heard stories like this before, and many of you will first think of the story of Epstein. Epstein and his sex trafficking ring that he set up there, and in fact it is the case that this authority, also him and his staff, are the very people who brought Epsilon to indictment. And from that perspective, there is a promise to the American public that they will continue to pursue anyone who goes in that direction. potentially more rings. And this is probably an announcement also to powerful people in America who are involved in such things that have not yet come to the public. He threatens, he says yes, we are uncompromising and no matter. Regardless of your reputation, your money, your fame, we will pursue these things.
No one should doubt our commitment on that. A year ago, Sean Combs stood in Times Square and was handed a key to New York City. Today, he's been indicted and will face justice in the Southern District of New York.
This was emphasized here again. No matter what reputation you have, Mr. We will persecute you if you do things like that, and the example is this P.Diddy who did it a year ago. Was sought there the keys of the city of New York Beckham and hat. This is such a great award. The key to the city is handed over. This is such an honorable act. It was a year ago when P.Diddy became, so to speak, an honorary citizen of the city of New York. And he said the example, we don't care at all. A year ago you might have been at the top. But now you're under indictment. Now you're in custody with us, a pretty blatant statement.
Second, we are not done. This investigation is ongoing, and I encourage anyone with information about this case to come forward and to do it quickly. Anyone with information can call 1-877-4-HSI-TIP.
That's strong here, too, he says. Chung Toi Kong Lam. We're not done yet. He says this investigation in the Gene Combat P.Diddy case, which is still going on. It may also be about other accomplices who were guilty there. And he says that this is going on and everyone who has something to contribute. Everyone who knows anything. Now is the time to get out of it because now is breaking. In this case, this system of power together and the long arm of Father Diddy will no longer be enough for you and possibly. And this is actually the case, when there are many more things to come. And this is what he promises the public here, so to speak. This investigation is far from finished. We are going through it.
I want to express my deep appreciation for the victims and witnesses who have used their voices and helped bring this criminal conduct to light. We would not be here without them. I also want to thank the dedicated case agents on the HSI trafficking in persons.
So interesting now. We are almost at the end of this press conference and there are a few thanks again, and it is actually like that. All these investigations can only come about if the victims are to go to the authorities when the victims make this public. When the victims get these things rolling. And he thanks, so to speak, everyone who has had the courage to come out and tell us what is important and what is interesting. According to credit, there is now also a thank you to other authorities who are involved there, and also to his own team members, and also to other investigative authorities. Some of whom also come from the civilian sector. Who will see it right away, and where he says that they put an incredible amount of work into it. Almost around the clock. Research these things. It only shows what he wants to show here. Which is the effort his authority and also the authorities with whom he cooperates actually go to. The amount of effort they put in and have put in. Just in this case, these raids, which were in March before the raids to carry out a raid. Some as a public prosecutor already had to do some. Of course, suspicions have been identified, and they have actually worked extremely hard there over the last 2 years. In this case, that's what he's saying here, and it's also interesting to see which other authorities are ignored there.
They have been with us since day one and have worked tirelessly on this investigation. They will continue to be invaluable partners to us. I also want to thank the incredible agents and analysts from SCNY who have also provided tremendous assistance on this case. I'm deeply grateful for their continued work. And finally, I want to thank the outstanding career prosecutors from SCNY who are handling this case. Meredith Foster, Emily Johnson, Chrissy Slavic, and Nancy Steiner, and their supervisors, Jamie Backleiter and Jacqueline Kelly. They are members of the Civil Rights Unit in our criminal division.
The ladies you are introducing here now, he says this is a civil rights unit, which I find interesting too. These are just things that somehow exist in the USA, but they don't exist that much here. The where civil rights activists work with the authorities. Somewhere there and then. Lately those are the forces that get something like that rolling. Because we know that this is a powerful person, a P. Diddy or an Epstein like that. These are powerful people. How do you get people like that in court? Normally or very often it is like that. Especially in the USA, the homeland of capitalism, you can somehow buy yourself out with money. But if you are powerful enough and have enough money, then you can bribe everything somewhere, or you can get top lawyers who will then twist the case. In fact, there is also a counter-development there in America, in which civil rights people also come in and to bring these cases to light. In fact, it is also the case here. The one who comes, Diddy, he offered bail to the public prosecutor's office. So Diddy offers bail so that he will be released from $40,000. Which is really an unheard of sum, and in the vast majority of cases it is like that in America. By the way, you can't go free with bail, which you could accuse in America. Otherwise it's a very old story. It used to be called blood money in archaic times. You can buy yourself out for crimes. That can also be an advantage for the victim. If the victim or their relatives then get a really high sum of millions, it may even be more helpful for the victim than some trials. That's possible in America, but here just not even $40,000. No matter what you pay for bail, no chance.
Created the Civil Rights Unit when I became U.S. Attorney. I'm deeply proud of their work on this and so many other cases. I'll now take some questions.
So, now I'm going to finish the press conference. He answers the questions evasively and perhaps doesn't want to answer them at all. A very interesting question came from one of these journalists. One brought up the connection with the Epstein case and also asked, "Hey, now this is Father Diddy, who is sitting in the same prison as Epstein back then, and he is, so to speak, from the same prison." Defendant, and that's where he asked this legitimate question. Can you guarantee P. Diddy's security this time, that he will survive in prison? That he will neither have the possibility of committing suicide nor that he will possibly be killed? Because actually, however, the situation is somewhat similar. Again, it's like he may have a bunch of other people involved in these stories, and now of course exciting if it ever comes to court. Or it will come to court. How is Father Diddy going to get other people in there? That's the question, and that's why I found it very interesting that one of the journalists asked, "Hey, but pay attention to Father Diddy, not that it's like Epstein, because then these. He then closed his mouth forever and so on." Yes, let's get out of this press conference and so far we are dealing with this case a bit. So what is so crass for me, does it? It's a story where you ask yourself, how can such a milieu actually arise? Where does it actually come from? And if you look at the whole story, then we have to look, who is actually this P. Diddy? Where does he come from? He is actually about the same age as me. My generation was born in 1969 in Harlem, New York. Schwarzenviertel, his father, and that's an interesting character, his father. He was a soldier in the Vietnam War, and after the Vietnam War he comes back to New York and actually had the hope as a veteran that he would get a certain recognition there. Hey, he served in a war and that it would be easier for him to maybe get a job somewhere and slowly but surely build an existence. A bourgeois existence. But the story is when his father came back from Vietnam. 69 or 70. What is he doing in Harlem? Big economic problems, no jobs, which most of the people he knew before the war, who are now like this again, where he will build contacts again, who are either addicted to drugs or they sell drugs. That's the situation he has found. And there are just no jobs where you can get involved. And then what does this man do? He becomes a drug dealer, P. Diddy's father. And he has become quite a big number in New York relatively quickly. This means that P. Diddy did not grow up in the poorest conditions. Because that has always been the case. According to Crime Money, And it goes so far that his father is shot in such drug deals when the boy is 23 years old, and that's what makes it so clear, I think, that I am thinking about how I say it best. But perpetrators like P.Diddy were, in fact, early victims. This is such a closed system. How do such things come about? The boy has already grown up in a criminal family, in a criminal environment, and as a boy, you know, when he had contact with mafia people that his father knew, he already had a few strange things as a boy saw and received, and in fact that's such an aspect that you could almost talk about it a little more deeply and maybe even have your own show at some point. Because the story of his father, the soldier who comes home from Vietnam and then ends up in this drug swamp. This is a story that has gone so well for many. And some say that it was even done on purpose, that the state or parts of the state, intelligence agencies, CIA, that had programs in the 60s, using drugs to make politics, and we have encountered this elsewhere before. Around the story of Laurel Canyon and Hollywood Hills, i.e. this hippie music scene in the 60s, and where it's about LSD, and I once made a whole program about it, which also tells the story of LSD, and many believe that's such a conspiracy story. But that's actually the case. In any case, the state used LSD in the 60s to influence people connected with the MK Ultra program, and in San Francisco they also made a large voluntary field experiment to just see what happens there if we spread the LSD so much, and these allegations were already known back then. At that time, there were already a lot of black communities that completely rejected LSD. Black musicians too. There are only a few black musicians who were involved in this hippie movement, because for many black people LSD already applied back then, which is used to weaken us around us, to weaken the black man. That's why LSD is, so to speak, more towards this hippie direction, and the accusation is that these black neighborhoods were flooded with heroin to weaken them. Because at the point, it's always like, I do so many shows here and many relate to each other. I did a show not too long ago, or even 2 shows, about this subculture, the black subculture in America in the 60s, about the Black Panthers, about these whole community movements that music and then hip-hop emerged from. And of course this is all so much prior knowledge in order to be able to classify this case as such now. And there, we had already shown that there were very strong aspirations among blacks to make themselves autonomous, to make themselves free. There were even ideas that you might secede some states to make pure black states. But in any case, also in the cities in New York and so on, there was the idea of the Black Panther was to achieve a certain autonomy, to govern themselves, to organize themselves, and this movement, it became quite strong. And then the state has. That's just different in America than it was in America in the 60s. I told you about the riots in Detroit, where thousands of buildings were torched. We don't know anything like that here. Which means from the state's point of view we were on the verge of a civil war back then, and that's definitely why it is. In a logical way, it is understandable that CIA people thought, we need this whole black movement. We need the weaknesses, and one of the means was possibly the flooding with drugs and someone who dealt intensively with it. That's John Potash here. That's why I'll give you a little literary tip. That has nothing to do directly with the P.D. the story, but with the backgrounds of how such milieus arise in the first place, and John Potash. Did he write this book? A few years ago, drugs as weapons complemented the drug war against us. In America, this is a buzzword, so this was against drugs, but yes, the war against drugs, but John Potash meant it that way. On the other hand, drugs are used as an instrument of war against one's own population, and that is also a point. People like me are often accused of it. These are conspiracy theories, and conspiracy theories are usually intended to somehow serve a rather narrative. Right-wing conspiracies. But I mean, it's just the other way around here. It's already in the title. In the subtitle, the CIA is the murdered targeting of SDS Pant. hers, Hendrix, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac and other leftists. John Potash is certainly not a right-winger. He is rather left if you think like that in these categories. A left-wing civil rights activist, the writer, who also makes films, and who tries to show that there were many conspiracies against all kinds of movements or against people. They wanted to change something in America. Black Panther SDS, that's the student union. So the whole one, the 68, we're talking about America, is a bit different than in Europe. You can't put it together and interesting. And also what names appear here: Jimi Hendrix, John Lennon, Kurt Cobain, Tupac. That's kind of the background there. And if we think about it, Father Diddy's father, that fits right into this story. You actually come from Vietnam there and somehow want to build something, and you see how your whole environment sinks into this drug milieu, which didn't exist before. There was heroin before. There was certainly a threat scene in New York before. But not on this scale, that's all at once. And there are very clear connections. War with the Vietnam War, they definitely have drugs. Including this heroin. It actually comes from Southeast Asia. Opium is probably growing there, and because of the Vietnam War it happened that a lot of them. His intelligence services have brought drugs from Southeast Asia to the USA. Partly in the body bags, i.e. in those where actually fallen American soldiers were. They were also used as a smuggling line. They just get through customs, and it was like that back then. In Thailand, there were the big recreational centers there, that is, when the American soldiers needed a vacation. Then they were sent to Thailand, where they were sometimes there for months, and there these connections arose between the Americans and the Golden Triangle. This opium dealer, and the big question is, of course, how much is an agenda that comes from the government? How far is it, or how far is it simply individuals within the CIA using their position of power? This is actually not that easy to assess and not that easy to clarify. It's just like all the stories. It goes on for decades, up to the stories in the 90s of this cocaine trafficking from Central America into the USA, where then families like the Clintons are involved and so on. It's not clear. I'll say it very clearly. We don't know exactly how much it really is an agenda, because the government is also involved in these things. At the time, presidents like Nixon or something like that, when they are involved in it, or are it just people or systems within the Secret Service that become independent? We are also there, in the middle of the Cold War, which means that there were very, very large budgets in these secret services. The CIA was huge, and, that's not exactly clear whether it was the hippies with the LSD so that you could sort of dissolve this anti-war movement, or whether it was the black people with the heroin to weaken any kind of community work. Black Panther and so on, that was to criminalize. That was an agenda from the very top. Or whether it was some who just took advantage of the business, or probably somewhere a mix of both. As far as it goes, that's sure, but it's a fact that in the 60s and 70s these entire groups were weakened with drugs. Well, and you have to know that. Because in the end it's just like that. It's this whole P-Day, the story is just a sad story. The guy definitely has a lot of talent. He has an artistic talent. But he's also an incredible entrepreneur if you make it in your life in something like show business. Up to $1 billion, for sure. You estimate up to $1 billion he could have made. Then he is definitely a good businessman. Someone who has a certain power. Then I think to myself, such a story. It could also be such a success story. It could also run so differently. Similar to what I also thought of people like Tupac or something. He could really also have such a power. He could be a role model for his community, and he could be someone who actually somehow changes the living conditions of blacks. But if you look at the story of P. Diddy, it went exactly the other way. It's a psychopath. He's become a psychopath, and it's also scary that psychopaths get into such positions in show business. Probably not just in show business, and where and how does that happen? This is a system that you have to criticize. It's just authoritarian structures, it is. They are power structures. And when more and more power accumulates, then psychopaths can suddenly get into amazing positions and cause an incredible amount of damage there. Whether that's an Epstein, whether that's a P.Diddy, that doesn't have anything to do now. That's in the case now a black movement. Some would say, yes, that's just hip-hop, and so hip-hop also has a strong power. I told you that before, how hip-hop grew out of this community movement in America. In New York. Ghetto parties, to do something for the community, and I already said that at the time. That this whole thing, when things change like this, will think in addition to this gang. This criminal way of thinking, fuck life, as it is gangster life, as a Tupac called it. That it is such a shame that it went in this direction, because it could have gone in a completely different direction. Something that community demands, and behavior like P. Diddy's is the opposite of community promoting. And I really think that's such a really, really sad story. Which, of course, does not absolve him of his responsibility. This is also a very important point. I'm trying to understand what's happening. I'm not here as a judge, that's not my job, but it's important that there are people like that who take this over. But I'm just trying to understand the person. How can that be? I see a P. Diddy and I think this person who could be so strong, so in the positive. How is it that he has such a veto and that he now uses until the end of his life? Because I don't know that he comes out again, who knows? Honestly, you can also understand if he commits suicide. Life is ruined, he won't get out that easily, but in the end, the system also creates these people. I don't believe that people are born evil. I believe that when you come as a person, you already bring something with karma. You also have a certain personality, and maybe there are exceptions to everything. But for the vast majority of what I deal with it to understand why such things happen. How does a person like that tick in the vast majority of the stories I look at? This leads to crime and abuse of power. It's such an uncanny way of how victims and perpetrators, what relationships they have. Every one of them is a perpetrator. No, don't get out of them. Of everyone in this whole P. Diddy story is victim and perpetrator. They're both, that's how it works. You get as a little boy at 2 or 3 years old, your dad gets shot and you're in this fuckly from the beginning and stuff. Perpetrators emerge. And of course that doesn't mean that you somehow take away their responsibility, because that's the crucial thing. Responsibility and freedom always go hand in hand. Always hand in hand. You can use freedom, but you have to stand up for what you do. And that's exactly what it doesn't do to you. Everything is always deported. There was already this incident in the 90s where there was a shooting in a club and a woman was seriously injured, and P.Diddy was involved there. His companion at the time was also a superstar himself, Jennifer Lopez. She carried the gun into the club. For him, no. I mean, she probably didn't do it that voluntarily either. He forces her, in turn manipulates her, and Honored then shot around with the gun. But it didn't become so clear in court and someone else had to go to prison last time. That means P.Diddy is an example of not accepting responsibility, and you have to. But it doesn't work other way, and I mean, you could also use this whole story as an opportunity to criticize this rampant liberalism in general. That's how it is portrayed in many alternative media, yes. Look at how depraved it all is, this show business. But I tell you, it's not all like that, not all of it. So and that's the question of how such things can arise, and from my point of view it's just the system. It creates an environment, which doesn't relieve you of any responsibility. Because I can only recommend it to everyone and have done it elsewhere. I've already done it les times. Dostoevsky's Guilt and Atonement, really. That's the topic of the book, which I deal with exactly with these topics and where it becomes clear. The atonement, say the punishment. The die is not just to satisfy us, this bad guy we have now locked away forever or something like that. But that also serves. So the perpetrator needs atonement to have a chance of obtaining a grant. That doesn't work without it. To accept responsibility, he must accept atonement. The punishment simply can't be done differently, and that's why my point here is not to say, well, there can't be anything about it because he had such a difficult childhood. Because yes, others also have a difficult childhood. Others manage it in their lives to change that too. But conversely, you can say almost all serious criminals. You see, if you look at their lives, there are so many possibilities where they could have turned. But where it develops in one direction. That's why it's a kind of dialectic. Some say, we need tougher laws, we need tougher punishments, and so on, and the others. I'm now really building up so polar, so extremes, and somewhere in the discussion usually moves somewhere between the other extreme and hey. These thoughts were already written by Dostoevsky. Maybe man can't do anything about it. Modern brain scientists say that there is no freedom. Everything you do is predetermined. Then of course you are not guilty at all. But do you see where the catch is? If you kill someone, if someone is not guilty, then they're not free either. So they don't have the freedom to decide either. They say that you are simply, so to speak, just a product of some genes, can't do anything about it, but then there is no freedom either, that is. As I remember, that was a bit like before. In the time when there were duels like this. Someone was even capable of satisfaction. So someone was even entitled to have a duel, and for the aristocrats at that time it was so full of factional capacity, only another aristocrat. Only those who met at eye risk could do something like a duel. If I now insult any serf, he cannot insult you at all, so to speak, because he has no freedom at all. He can neither harm you, nor can he commit crimes. Be held accountable and, above all, prosecuted, because he doesn't even have some kind of civil right. But as soon as you have this right, you have to take responsibility. There's simply no other way, and that's what's out of balance here. Yes, I see, time goes on. I have a few other things here. By the way, a photo. I just had to show, this is a picture of this rat. Of this raid on his property. That's all the baby oil and lubricant that they found. So just one picture. You have more stuff than a total of 1,000 bottles. How crazy is that? But the big question now is also that arises here. Are there other people involved? Similar to what was with the Steam app story. There are also lists of people who have already been to these parties, so to speak, and these lists are relatively large, and you can just give yourself a few names. I don't know most of the names. They are all people from show business. Some are very close, Pete, like Justin Timberlake. Perpetrators, victims, history. As a minor, as a teenager, he has already come into these grips of this father Diddy. He partly lived with P.Diddy, you have to imagine that. If you live as a teenager in such an environment, this may not have a good effect on your psyche. And of course at that time officially the thing was Father Diddy. Who is the mentor who makes the boy an international pop star? Which also happened, but at the same time, if you watch interviews with Timberlake from today, you see what a broken young person is like. There are a lot of people from show business at the start. Especially musicians, but of course also many actors. Some of you also come under accusation in other places. For example Bill Cosby. But there are also many sports stars at the start. Basketball player Michael Jordan. I have another picture. This is the list. I can continue a little bit like that. Let's look. Magic Johnson, great basketball player. LeBron James, one of the greatest athletes in the world. These are all people who have proven to have been to parties like this. No, that was said incorrectly. Who were proven to be at parties with P.Diddy. That now means that everyone there is somehow involved in this dirty, freak-out stories. No, that doesn't mean it's very important. You can be invited to a party without knowing what's going on. These parties sometimes take place in some big properties, where there is no idea, there are dozens of rooms, where there are different wings, where there are underground facilities, and that is also what came out during the raids at P-Day. I mean, there are also secret rooms, underground passageways, all things that we've interestingly done. The same goes for Laurel Canyon, had this theme that you are also present. Some from the 20s even have such strange underground rooms. Why can you have a party like that and you're maybe in a part of the party and that's so open and drinking there and a bit of music and everything is cool, and somewhere in another part of the party the most serious crimes are taking place? You might not notice that, and that's what they did, or that's what this P. Diddy did. He also surrounds himself with all these stars to be protected, so to speak. Yes, hey, everyone goes there. That makes it even more attractive, and I don't know what sex worker you are invited to a party where people like that make so good money and so on. I just want to say it. Not everyone on this list is involved in these criminal activities. You really have to look at it by chance. That's what the presumption of innocence really applies to individuals. You can't drag every place into it. On the contrary, that is, they are, so to speak, clamped into this manipulative relationship. If you go there, LeBron James, then maybe you can go there, and so on. Maybe it's also the case that step by step you try to draw even such super celebrities into these circles. First you invite to a party and then you just take a look. How far does it go? Of course, I know these people personally with LeBron, who is such a strong athlete. I don't think he has too much affinity for drugs. He's just too big an athlete for that. But just test. You try people. So to compromise bit by bit, and when someone gets involved in these really dark things, yes, then once you are caught in a net, you almost can't get out, because then it is documented. It is always held against you. It is press material. Complementary material. This is very important. The same goes for this story with the Steam app. We have to be so careful. You can't say to anyone who is somehow associated with that, okay, this is proof that he was involved in such things. We are talking about serious crimes, which each individual had to prove. And I guess, especially in this case, Diddy, the evidence is now very, very good, and as the public prosecutor said earlier, we are not ready, we are not finished. The thing is running now and we will investigate all of this and see what it comes to light. But I just want to point out that because these lists are circulating on the internet, and there would be a lot like Malice, like Boa, but the one who was there at the party and who, by the way, also, I have it, yes. I don't even know what the list is on here. Oh, there are so many big names in it. That's crazy. Pharrell Williams, Lil Wayne. Somewhere on the list was also, I think there was even an indictment. The name was even dropped. Also a Prince Harry. So an English royal family, in it again. You get quite nervous because the story is also included in these apps. With this Prince Harry is not Prince Andrew, and also that really applies, and I have like distrust of these royals, and still you have to be careful. You can't just say it. Yes, Prince Harry is looking here. He was at P.Diddy's parties, he's a womanizer or something. It's not that simple, but if you're on a list like that it's still quite unpleasant. And thank you. Thank you for your interest. Stay. We Wade supports the channel. Until next time, ciao.